I'm Glenda Rose, President of the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, and I'd like to welcome you to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm joined by former President Scott Brady and State Archaeologist Sarah Sportman for today's program on archaeology in the area of Lake Waramaug, Connecticut, the second largest natural lake in our state. I'm excited to hear more about the discoveries in this area and to learn about the remarkable Indigenous people of our small, diverse state. So let's get started and take it away, Sarah.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show. Tonight, we're joined by our friend and colleague, Craig Nelson, to talk about archaeology around Lake Waramaug. And as Glenda said, this is the second largest natural lake in Connecticut. It's an inland, upland lake in Litchfield County in the towns of Kent, Warren, and Washington, and for thousands and thousands of years, it's been an important place on the landscape for Indigenous people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and some of the significant sites that have been found around the edges of the lake, and some of the old and new research that's been happening on those sites. But before that, I wanted to welcome Craig to the show. How are you tonight, Craig?
Very good, thank you, Sarah.
Thanks so much for joining us. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you so much for stepping up and taking over the Western Connecticut State University Field School with our other colleague, Feline Schneiderman, after the sad passing of our friend and colleague, Cos Scarlatta. If you hadn't have done that, those students would have had been able to have that experience this summer and complete their course requirements. And, I think it's a good lead into one of the sites we're going to talk about tonight, which is the Deer Run site where you all were working this summer.
Yes, we had the school at Deer Run, which the Litchfield Hills Archaeology Club has been working at for quite a few years, on and off, and COVID kind of slowed it down a little. But it's a great teaching site. It's easy to find stuff there, both pottery and points, and they get also, in a lot of cases, to find a hearth, which the students this year did, so they also learned how to bisect that. The site itself is what we have found going back through the years. We have terminal archaic, late archaic, early woodland, and late woodland items that we've found. So between pottery and points, those are diagnostic. We've had a few pieces of carbon dating on where we had some pottery, where we had in a hearth. Those were both, one of them was around 2,400 before present, and another one was around 3,930 years before present.
Well, Craig, from my perspective, that's always a treat when you can find Indigenous pottery. It's not something, for our listeners that haven't done a lot of excavation, it's not something you see at a lot of sites. So it's really important when we do find that.
Yes, it is. And there's one piece of pottery that we have not that was next to a hearth that we have not dated the hearth yet. And according to Dr. Lucy Lavin, that is a type of pottery in Connecticut that really hasn't been dated yet. So that's another important factor that we have at this site. And over the years, we found that our feeling is it's a fall site because of the seeds and stuff that we found. It's a temporary site. It wouldn't be there during the summer. There's no water. There's an intermittent stream right next to it. In fact, the site is on both sides of that stream. So it would lend itself more toward a fall with what we've found.
Yeah, so maybe to situate it a little bit in terms of the lake, and we can get into talking about the lake itself. We kind of dove into Deer Run, which is fine, but this site is not right on the lake. It's actually up above it on
Correct. It's on a small plateau above the lake. There are basically 3, 4, 5, 6 sites around the lake that have been professionally done, and there's a few other sites I know that private collectors have found stuff. The northeast corner of the lake is a large delta, which is supplied where Sucker Brook runs into the lake. There are 3 named sites on that delta. You have 6LF1, which is Hopkins, 6LF7, and 6LF38. Personally, I would put them all under one name because it's one delta, and those are just because of modern property boundaries. They, going all the way back to Dave Thompson, who in the 60s, he did some test pits in 6LF1. We know that that's a very large site, and that goes from paleo all the way up through contact. To the west, on the Kent side, where the state park is, there's a site that was, well, it was, phase 1 was done. Ernie Weingart, and he was with Mike Raber at the time. They did some STPs, and at the north and the south end of the site, they did find some stuff. They went back to do a little more excavation, and the contractor had come and torn the whole place up. And they found stuff in the dirt piles.
Yeah, not the first time that's happened, right?
And honestly, I'm a little upset with that because that's state funds on a state site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, it should not happen.
It should not have happened.
Hey, can I back up for a second?
Craig,
can I back you up for a second? Because I think we missed the boat, because you kind of came to archaeology in the same kind of format as I did. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this, and what brought you up to the point where you're teaching?
I lived right next to 6LF1. It's a 17-acre field that at the time was a cornfield. And I started walking the field and collecting surface. And that's where I met Dave Thompson, who has since passed away. He was very particulate with his archaeology and paperwork. I did my first dig with him. It was a rock shelter over in Kent Hollow. I don't know if that was ever published. And after he was a teacher at Gunnery, he left, and then Ned Swigert took over his position at the Gunnery School as a history teacher, and he continued the love of archaeology, so I stayed on with him, and eventually Ned and Russ Hansman started the Institute for American Indian Studies, which was the Institute for American Indian Archaeology at the time. It had its name changed. And I've been with it ever since, both digging and research and so forth. It's been a passion of mine for many years.
Yeah, and it shows. And you've brought out some of your personal collection to see some of the things you collected as a kid, and you have some really interesting material.
Yeah, there's a couple of pieces from the Hopkins site. I have what's called a spool stone. I still have not heard of another one found in Connecticut. They're documented up and down the Hudson River, and in situ they've been found in the Middle Woodland time period, but nobody knows what they're used for. And the wear is unusual because even though it's a shape of a spool of thread, but the wear patterns on it are on the ends and on the sides of the cylinder. So it's an unusual item. I also have a full fluted point from that field that Dr. Jonathan Lothrop dated just a little over 12,000 years ago, which I know that when I found it and I showed it to Ned, he was, that's the end of the field, because paleo stuff's starting to pop up.
Yeah.
But in the museum collection, they already had a piece. They had the base of a Whipple point, which goes back even further, approximately 13,000. And I know that Ned photographed or drew it, and that was in an article he'd written in the Connecticut Bulletin, number 38. And Dr. Zach Singer also said that that's what it was.
It's funny you bring Zach up, because I was going to say, that much paleo stuff kind of floating around, because you're right next door to Templeton there. is really interesting. That something is going on and is attracting those first peoples to that area pretty significantly. It sounds like.
Yes, we're approximately 2.5 miles as the crow flies. If you follow the stream beds and forget going up over the hills and everything, you can be from Templeton up to Hopkins in about 5.5 miles. So they're not that far apart. And there's a site at the south end of the lake called Woodruff Cave. We also have a very fine Dalton Point out of that site, too. So they've been there for a long time. I recently reread the article that Ned wrote on the Woodruff Cave because the museum itself has pulled a lot of the collection back out. When they were doing the dig there, they had over 300 volunteers digging, cataloging, and so a lot of things got shoved into bags and one bag tagged, and as they're going through it, they're finding a lot more bone. And most of the bone tends to be deer, some moose, elk, not moose, I'm sorry. And a lot of the bone has been worked into tools. They've got awls, and they think they have a needle. Not positive at this point.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. And then to top everything off, as they were going through, there was a tiger shark's tooth. And how it got there, we have no clue.
A little ways from the...
Yeah.
But it's an interesting piece when you're up in the middle of the woodland here to all of a sudden you have something like that.
I think it must have been a Sharknado that put the tiger shark up there in Lake Waramaug.
Must have been one of those big hurricanes that came up through or something.
That's the most parsimonious explanation.
Yeah.
So Woodruff Cave is it's a really important site because of the faunal preservation, which is this animal bone preservation, which is a thing that we lack in a lot of our pre-contact Native American sites because of our acidic soils. Rock shelter contexts, those sheltered kind of contexts, are the ones where you do have it. But it was one that was sort of extensively excavated. But like so many other sites, it also had a lot of bad things happen to it before the excavations got.
The property owner did some dynamiting at one time for the stone, the overhang of the ledge. Even during the excavation, there was some pot hunting that had happened between days out in the field, things like that. So that didn't help. But some of the overhang had collapsed, so some of the site has never been touched because of the rock falls that collapsed on some of the archaic and time periods, so that whatever it collapsed on is still there because they did not get into that. They didn't want to move the stone. They were too large. But yeah, at the museum, Elizabeth Reed is going through everything, and she's gone through close to 8,000 bones right now, and we figure it's maybe about 1/3 of the way through, which that's a lot of bone.
It is a lot of bone.
Yeah, and reviewing the article that had been in the ASC Bulletin previous to this, before her work started to relook at it, the amount of species out there is really, really large. I mean, it's not just deer, although that seems to be the dominant bone type.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about what else is out there?
There was basically just about everything that we have here today.
That's true.
Beaver. There is. I did notice he said New England cottontail's extinct, but they're not. And in fact, Warren, Connecticut is one of the hot spots in the state for the New England cottontail. They tend to be a woodland rabbit, where the eastern cottontail is a field rabbit. And I think most people felt that New England was gone because there were so many open fields, and they didn't see them. And they were when you put the two together, very, very hard to tell them apart. Almost needed DNA at that point, because I had some state biologists show me skulls and things that at that point it was still hard to tell them apart. But we they found fox. The one thing we don't have is wolf. They had bobcat. All of the birds they talked about we have, including all the hawks, and we have bald eagles on Lake Waramaug. There's a nesting pair there for a few years now. So it's all of the mammals and stuff. The only thing that they didn't find was fish,
which is crazy, right? And I was shocked at the amount of snakes.
What kind of screening were they doing?
Yeah,
well,
that might be it.
We have a lot of snakes.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of snakes around. I walk out my backyard, and I have a lot of snakes. And in fact, this year when we had the field school up at Deer Run, we took one of the tarps off when we came back, and there was a big corn snake right there.
Bit a little excitement for the kids on that day?
Yeah, just a little. And we just threw him off in the brush, and he went off on his merry way. He don't bother you.
You had all kinds of turtle
out there. The only thing that they did say was the rattlesnakes, and I don't know of any rattlesnakes in this area. The closest is in Kent on the other side of the Housatonic River.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the other one that fascinated me was the short-faced dog. Were those domesticated, Sarah? I mean, is that a domesticated dog? Probably, right?
I think so. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
No, I'm not either.
I mean, it's dog. Sounds like it should be
I would have to do
domesticated.
some research to find that one out.
Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with that one.
And I think too, it's really important that Elizabeth is going back through these assemblages, because one thing that I've noticed with some of the older faunal assemblages, and a lot of it, comparative collections were smaller, and people were kind of trying to extrapolate and kind of figure out what they had. And sometimes they'd send things off to people in different areas, and you'd get these responses back for animals that don't even live here. So, because they were using their comparative collections.
Well, that's very understandable.
Yeah, it is,
definitely. We see that all the time just with the identification of points. You take the same point here, and you walk out to Ohio, it's the exact same point, but they got a different name for it. So.
Well, you can go to Massachusetts and get a different name for it.
Correct. And honestly, up around Lake Waramaug, we use Ritchie's typology because most of our stuff is toward New York. So we call Snook Hills, where if I was over in the eastern part of the state, I'd look at it and say it's an Atlantic.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting component of reviewing these older collections with new eyes, whether it's faunal collections, whether it's lithics, whether it's ceramics. I think that's a really important thing that we're starting to see happen a lot.
Yeah, and I think, getting people who have working in this area, who have worked in other areas, not just kind of been born and raised archaeologically in our region, they have kind of a broader perspective on some of that. And that goes elsewhere. People from Connecticut can go to other places and see the same things, like Zach Singer now in Maryland. But, realizing how much similarity there is across the eastern seaboard, and the ways that we've kind of pulled these things apart and split them out into different things. And there's probably a lot more continuity than we necessarily have grasped at this point.
Yeah. So, Craig,
I agree there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
In fact, I was listening to one of Zach's talks down there, and I questioned him on one of the points that he had named down there, and it was a paleo. But he said that where they are, it's identical to some stuff in the Northeast, but they use a southern name. But it's the same thing.
Yeah. Hey, you were talking about some of that rock shelter has collapsed and has never been excavated. I mean, what kind of surface area, percentage-wise, is that something that someday someone should go back and figure out a way to move those rocks to get underneath them?
Honestly, you could. There's probably quite a bit underneath there. I don't think you'll find as many bones, because most of that we figure is all woodland. And we think that everything underneath the rocks is going to be archaic, or maybe even older.
Right, so that's an important thing to kind of clarify, is that this is a multi-component site, and all of these animal bones seem to be coming from the later part of the occupation in the woodland period.
Correct. It's like at Deer Run, all the bones we're finding is calcified. So that they've been cooked and in a fire and so forth. So, and most of them are very small pieces. You can't identify anything.
Right. And that ties back to our problem here in New England with the acidity of these soils. It just eats up organic matter very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Correct.
And our open air sites, unless you have a tight feature context like a storage pit or something, you rarely get it. And even some of the historic bone starts to get pretty squishy.
Even in the historic, it doesn't take long, unless you got a refuge pit or an old privy that somebody put a lot of lime in. But you'll have that. But the Lake Waramaug it's still a very open site. There's, if you look at it, it's like an S or Z turned on its side. And to the west, there's a ridge behind the state park. And on the other side of that's a big swamp. And there's fields over there that private collectors have been for years pulling stuff out of. And then you have the same thing to the east. There's a ridge with a very large stone outcropping at the top. And you can see way down the valley toward New Milford from up there. And on the other side of that is another major swamp area with some fields where private collectors have been pulling stuff out of on private land there for years. So the whole area itself is just inundated with thousands of years of occupation. And I think the main site probably was the Hopkins Field, and all the rest of them are kind of satellite sites. They're not big. They tend to be more, probably different times of the year. And on the Lake Waramaug site, we've pulled out things like net sinkers. We have a beautiful slate ulu, so we know they were fishing there. So to find no fish at Woodruff, maybe it had nothing to do. It had to do with just the time of year, and that it was a butchering site for mammals. We don't know. It's a lot of speculation when you come to these things, and you just take what you have and come up with the best ideas you can at the time.
Well, you're talking about those two big swampy areas, and it seems like all those native cultures throughout all the time periods are exploiting that marsh resource pretty heavily, right? I mean, you figure there's got to be waterfowl and reptiles and mammals coming to drink and foodstuffs and plants, water lilies and cattails and
major habitats. Even today, most people that hunt deer, you got a place that's next to the edge of a swamp. The deer are in that area, and they come there. So it's not why they should be doing it 1,000 years ago. Why wouldn't that? I don't think changes a mammal's habitat because they're going for their own food.
So one other interesting thing, while we're still kind of on the rock shelter, and it's really in a kind of a neat location in the southern extent of the lake as it kind of channels out there in a kind of a narrow, I don't know if a gorge is the right word, but it gets really narrow at the bottom there. So the location's really interesting, I think. But another thing that I remember from reading, about the site in the past is that there wasn't just the main parts of the site. There were kind of these sub-chambers in the rock shelter that just seemed to be filled with debris, like bone and pottery and other types of materials.
Yeah, and I think some of that had to do with previous rockfalls. And I don't think they were different chambers, originally. I think with a rockfall, that would create in the middle a different chamber, or divide a bigger one into a couple of smaller ones, that type of thing. So that over years, as it filled in and other rock falls on top, it created just smaller chambers. And I think back with the archaic time period, we know with the rock falls we know are there, that rocks weren't moved, but they fell during that time period. So that created a whole other chamber that the woodland time period would have had a much smaller chamber to use.
Oh, so that was an old rock fall. You mean like a pretty
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that, it's really interesting to think about rock shelters and caves and things like that because there are these sites on the landscape with tremendous potential for preservation because they are so protected and they draw people. But there's also the incredible complication of trying to tease out how it all happened and how the sites formed and how the layers come together in those situations because it's not just humans that use caves. And there's all kinds of natural processes like erosion and sedimentation and things like that that come into play. So those are really tricky sites to tease out. So I think, it's great that people are taking a fresh look at this site because I imagine there's probably a lot more information there that we can get.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we know there's more information just because a lot of it, as I said, was bagged and just a couple of the bags are just marked lithics. And most of what's been found is bone.
Yeah, it's funny. You said 300 volunteers, and I was thinking, we had 20 out at our site the other day, and it was like, holy cow, there's a lot of people here. I don't know how you manage 300.
I don't know. I think that has a lot to do with what's recorded. And I think it makes it a lot harder for anybody trying to write a report or put things together from a site when you have that many people handling things.
But man, that level of public interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have the public interest.
Assuming they weren't all there on the same day.
Yeah. And there's other sites not that far away. You go a mile up Sucker Brook and you open up into a big field area and there's more archaic stuff there. Nick and I went over not too far from there to look at another rock shelter. In fact, it's the only rock shelter I saw that had two living levels. There was like a first floor along the stream, and then there was up above, there was a secondary living section. It was quite unusual.
And has that ever been excavated or just kind of documented?
It was partially excavated years ago by some of the kids at the gunnery school. And when Nick and I went there, we found that somebody has destroyed the rest of it.
Yeah.
It's a shame. And it's on state forest property.
Right, so that's not supposed to happen.
It's still a beautiful site.
Right.
I've never seen anything like it anywhere.
So I want to talk about Deer Run and I want to talk about Hopkins a little bit more, but maybe we could just, before we do that, we could talk a little bit more about the lake because I think the lake itself has kind of an interesting history and even the name of the lake, Lake Waramaug, I think really harkens back to its kind of important place on the landscape for Native people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the lake, as you had said, it was the second largest in the state. It's a glacial lake. The main water coming into the lake happens to be in the northeast corner of Sucker Brook. There's a couple of small streams into it, and the rest of it is spring-fed. It now is approximately 40 feet deep, but over the years, with all the erosion in the streams and everything, it's filled in. In fact, years ago, a group called the Lake Waramaug Task Force, who oversees the lake itself to keep it clean and so forth, and evasives out of it, dredged at the mouth of Sucker Brook a lot of, I couldn't tell you how many tons and yards of fill. And in fact, a lot of that fill was placed on a field next to 6LF1, Hopkins site, and raised and basically put a cap on that field. And that's a field that has never been excavated, even though a few points have come out of it. So it's got almost a 3-foot cap protecting that field right now. The name Waramaug was for Chief Waramaug. He was a native from the area, and he is buried down near Lover's Leap in New Milford. Don't know exactly where. A lot of people have guessed. And that research is, I'm not sure if we'll ever find it exactly where. And he was the one that signed a lot of the land treaties. There's a point on the lake called Cherry Point, and that's named for his son, Cherry. So it's the name and has continued on in through the years of the native use of the area. The mouth of Lake Waramaug is the entrance to the East Aspetuck, and that flows down into the Housatonic. And before dams were put up way down below, they even had eels coming all the way up to here. They came up the Chepaug and the Housatonic River. So that was another food source that you don't see or hear a lot of about right now.
And I think that, you mentioned that he's buried, or supposed to be buried near the Great Falls in New Milford, which I think, from what I've read about him, is that one of their major village was there, but they had another settlement on the lake seasonally.
The settlement on the lake was Hopkins' site.
Yeah.
And then they had a couple of them in the Milford. You had the one by the Great Falls, and then you had another one north of there on the west side of the river, which they found some burials over there, along with other stuff. That's still private property over there.
And he was late 17th, early 18th century, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it's sort of getting into the colonial period when.
Yeah. He was in contact with Europeans, and like I said, he worked signing papers with them, so on land transfers.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Deer Run. I feel like, you just came out of the field season there, and the Litchfield Hills Archaeology Club has worked there for many, many years. It's a site I don't know a lot about, and I'd like to learn more. Can you give us kind of a rundown of kind of the extent of the site and the types of things that you found? You mentioned that you have features, which is great.
Yeah, it's an upland plateau. It's a little unusual because we are digging right next to a colonial cemetery, which supposedly the first white person born in the town of Warren is buried at. In fact, we would love to get some GPR out there and try and find out where the extent of that cemetery is, because I think there's only 2 stones that are still standing. It's got an intermittent stream next to it. On the other side of the stream, on the north side, we started to do one pit, and within the first 15 centimeters, we started finding, and because of all the poison ivy and what we had open at the site, we just left that one there. But that'd be for future down the road. We have open, let's see, we're about 6 meters wide, and what do we go? 14 long.
Wow. It's big.
It's a decent sized site. And that's probably not even a quarter of the site, if that. And the unusual part is to the south end of the site, the hearths tend to be in the A soil, whereas we go further to the north, they're down in the B soils. And multiple hearths. There was one unit in the north that in a 1 meter unit, we came across 5 hearths.
Wow.
Are they kind of overlapping, like cutting into each other?
Yeah, overlapping, so they were at different levels for different years.
That's like really intensive use of the site.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's just loaded with hearths from north to south. Every unit, just about every unit, has a hearth in it, or 2 or more. And that's the really unusual thing about this site. But they're all very small. They tend to be 1 centimeter thick around the edges, and maybe up to 3 in the center. Most of them are oval shape. 30 to 40 centimeters length at the most, and maybe 20 wide. So we're not talking large hearths here. When you start to see the soil color, you have to stop right away. And where the students were, they found one they found two. One, they just happened to hit the edge of it, but the other one they did excavate. But both of those were in the A soil, and they had very sharp eyes and were able to discern that dark color right away, even though it was basically in an A soil, dark A soil. That was very good.
Yeah, is there any bone or charcoal with them, or it's just really the
No,
discoloration?
The hearths all tend to have charcoal. Yeah. We've taken it out. The students, for that hearth, they did float it. They started to sort the stuff, but that's still sitting over at the lab at the museum. And there's a lot that could probably be learned from that. We still have other soil samples from other hearths, like that one where that piece of pottery is that Lucy would like dated. And we have charcoal pieces that are big enough to identify the type of wood in some of them.
Plug for the museum. If anyone's interested in sorting some flotation samples, contact Paul and Craig at the Institute for American Indian Studies.
Oh, yes. We do have plenty of stuff to separate.
You probably don't
Most of the flotation's been done, but we have a lot of separation to do.
Yeah. Maybe not 300 volunteers, but they could use a couple out there.
That's a tough job, boys, sorting float samples.
Yes, it is.
It's for young eyes.
Yes. Mine are a little past that.
So are you...
Even with a large lens.
I know.
Are you getting other botanicals besides the charred wood out of there, like seeds or any nutshells, that kind of stuff?
Some of it, we thought we found some seeds in the stuff from this year.
Oh, cool.
And they were all put aside, separated from the wood itself, so that when we have somebody that can identify them, take a look at them.
Yeah, so just for people who don't understand this process, when we dig an archaeological feature, we often take large soil samples out of it, and then we water screen it, basically, or run it through a flotation process, which means that you're basically sifting all the dirt in water, and you're kind of scooping up all the light stuff that floats to the top, and you set that aside. And then all the heavy stuff that floats out to the little pebbles and rocks, and if there's any artifacts or things like that, kind of sinks to the bottom of the screen, and you separate that out, and then you let it dry, and then you go through it with tweezers and a big magnifying glass. And try to pick out anything that might be cultural. So in most cases, that's where we're getting most of our botanical data, like seeds and nutshells, corn. Later periods, sometimes you even find whole corn and beans and things like that that are charred that can then be analyzed and help provide information about diet and seasonality and things like that. But it is an incredibly tedious and time-consuming process. It's a great learning experience for students and.
but I mean, it really does work. I mean, some of the Jones site, some of the seeds are super small, like strawberry seeds and stuff. So, to survive in the ground for 12,000 years or 10,000 years is pretty phenomenal, so that someone can identify that, which then you can make that determination. Okay, strawberry seeds are present, so when do strawberries come into fruit? So maybe this site is occupied in the springtime. So that's how the importance of these botanicals, besides diet, it can help us tell about the climate, it can help tell us about the season that the site is being used.
Yeah, at Deer Run we have beech nut and hickory that we have found in previous flotations.
Right, and you were saying you think it's a fall occupation, which makes sense.
Fits, yeah.
And it seems like maybe from the small kind of ephemeral hearths you're getting, that maybe it's repeated short-term occupations.
Yes. And I know of other sites that are on that same hillside off on other private properties. And from the points that I've seen, those tend to be all woodland sites. In fact, one person up there did find a soapstone pipe. I have photographs of it, and it's a carved pipe, and it has a snake on one side and a turtle carved into it. Pretty crude, but very nice piece. But that family, the father that found it, they still have it.
Any indication from debitage that they're making points or resharpening or any kind of toolkit information?
Not a lot of debitage up there at Deer Run. There's a few points. A lot of them. Probably it's weird because I would say most of the stuff was points and not tools. And that's a little unusual, but I don't know if it would have been a hunting camp that they just dropped stuff. We call it Deer Run because when it first opened it up, the deer were right there, and they're still there today. Maybe they had set up a blinds or something there, and when you look at it, there's kind of a topology itself kind of lends itself to a very steep bank on the stream, and then a flat spot where animals could cross it, and then they drop back off into steeper sides again. So it's a natural funnel for animals to come through, and that may be that. But if that was the case, you would have thought we might have found more bone, even calcified, but we don't find that either.
Yeah, unless, like you said, it's short term. You do your hunting, you bring it right back to camp.
Well,
and if they were, right down at the bottom of the hill from the site, you're at the Hopkins site, so it's not hard to take an animal down that far. If straight downhill, I don't know, you're what, maybe 3,000 feet, 2,000.
Yeah.
So like you were saying,
it's not a long, and it'd be downhill. So even if you kept a full animal, you could drag a deer down that without any trouble.
Is there any bone from Hopkins that you know of?
I'm sorry?
Was there any bone from Hopkins that you're aware of?
Not that I can remember anybody finding any, but just about everything is a surface except for those tests that Dave did.
Right.
There was, when I was a kid, there was 2 boys that used to walk the field, and they used to pick up pottery.
Mm-hmm.
How they did it, I don't know. I was never able to surface find pottery. But they did find a lot of pottery, which was unusual. And that's a site that, where they found their pottery, is basically untouched. That part of the field is untouched. Because the field itself has gone through, down in one spot, they pushed the topsoil away and took out the gravel for a couple of different projects. On the north side, next to the road, they dug a trench and buried a stone wall that went all the way down through. To the west, the stream was kind of straightened out, and a little bit of fill was put in there. So sections of the field have been tampered with over years. But there's still a few choice areas that, you could go in and do some work in. And that 6LF7, the little field next to it, that's also owned by the Hopkins family. And a few years ago, we did some test holes there. And the only thing we came across was one snow-kill point. And that was it. And I think out of a half a dozen holes. But
it's pretty lean.
They were hard digging. It was gravel all the way. And then you had the other site next to it, which is 6LF38, which is a very small, narrow piece of property. It's where the gunnery boathouse is for the rowing crew. And there's right next to it is another vacant site that's never been touched, which personally I feel there's stuff there. And then on the other side of Sucker Brook, there's a another space over there. That when some trees were planted, they started finding a bunch of stuff over there. There's this place down on Arrow Point, which is a point that is parallel to the state park along that side of the lake. And there was, I think, one paleo piece and some other stuff. I'm supposed to be looking at that collection not too long from now. But there's multiple archaic stuff from that site. So other sites all the way around the lake. And years ago, when I worked construction on the West Shore, there was one site that we were working at, and they had some of the finest clay that I have ever seen up in the Northeast. So for the woodlands people, there's a ready source of pottery-making material right there.
That would be a great project to do, kind of an elemental analysis to try to figure out if some of that pottery was made from that local clay.
Yes.
Get somebody on that.
I don't know if you could do that with X-ray fluorescence, or not sure how you'd have to go about that one.
I think that would be a good starting point, potentially, because if you have the pottery and you have the clay, you could...
Yeah, zap them back and hit them with the gun and see what shows up.
Yes. Yeah. But, yeah, then you have to get somebody in the geology department to bring that gun out, because that's more than I can afford. I think the cheapest one I found was like $15,000.
No, we have to work our relationships, because as archaeologists, we know that we need to borrow other people's technology whenever possible, because we don't have the money for...
That's the thing a lot of people don't understand with archaeology. You have to bring in people from so many other different fields, just to understand what you have at a site. You're talking to geologists, and then you got botanists and biologists, and then if you're going to have people who specialize in ground penetrating radar or things like that. So it's all a lot of different fields that are all brought in.
Has any of that field that you think is untouched out at Hopkins, has there been any geophysical, GPR, or anything done out there?
Nothing's been done on any of it.
Yeah.
The only true work is the 3 tests, well, really 4 test holes.
Right.
One they didn't go too far. 3 test holes that Dave Thompson did. Everything else has been surface collected.
That's interesting.
I won't say completely, because Litchfield Hills did do some testing, but it was where the land had already been backfilled.
Yeah.
So they started digging holes, and it was like the soil was all mixed up and getting all kinds of weird stuff, no matter how deep they went.
Yeah.
So that was not a good spot to dig in. But,
like one of those horror stories of archaeologists spending a whole season digging only to get to the bottom and find like a tarp or something.
Yeah, yes. So, but it's there are still some untouched areas of the field of the main field that would lend itself to some holes put in to find out what's there.
And you're thinking that that's a big living community, right? That there's a lot of people spending time on that site?
There has to be, just from the amount of stuff that's there, that's been found over the years there.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, now that collection, that Hopkins collection, is split. A good portion of it is at the Institute, and another portion of it, a very large portion, is at UConn in our collections.
Yeah.
And I know that we've talked before about bringing that together and sending it to the Institute, but what kind of plans do you all have for, future research on that site? Because it'd be great. I mean, there just seems like it's such a wealth of information.
Well, not only those two, I have my own personal collection, which is going over to the museum. And in the last couple of years, I've brought in a couple other small private ones that were out of that field. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed, to get another large one that was collected in that field. So down the road, the research that could be done, in fact, I do have a partial paper just on the landscape and the lay of that field and where things have been worked and where so parts of the field were destroyed for archaeological purposes and where they haven't, so that somebody could go in down the future. And in fact, Lucy's already edited part of it for me. But that would help a lot for somebody to go in, and because we're looking at lithics, and if I could ever get that pottery, that would be great. But I'm still working on that one.
Right.
I'm sorry. I think we all know that there's a lot of discoveries, archaeological discoveries, and important pieces that have already been dug up out of the field and are waiting in a drawer or in a box or in a bag for someone to come along and take an interest in them and be able to do the work that's associated with telling the story of those pieces.
Yes, yeah. And it's like what's being done with the Woodruff Cave. That's, it was dug in the early 70s, and now it's starting to look at in the museum. I know with Sarah's looking at the lithics, and Elizabeth's looking at the bones, and see what comes out of there. Besides, they've got a lot more to go.
Yeah, and it's so important to take those old collections with new perspectives, new information, new technologies, because I think there's still a lot more information to be gleaned out of those, and we still have a long way to go in our understanding of the pre-colonial period.
In fact, there's one large quartz, I call it a chopper, I'm not sure exactly what you would want to call it, that on the edge of it is coated with a green finish, where it was used to cut vegetables of some kind. Now, if that could be sent to somebody who has a very powerful microscope, maybe they can tell you what it was used on. Things like that. And that's sitting over at the museum in the collection. It's a beautiful piece, but there's a whole other piece that could give you another story of coming out of that field.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to finding out what you all learn as you move through this, and we should talk later off, about getting that collection to you. I know
Yes.
we've mentioned it before, but that'll be a great thing for us to do this fall as we go through some of the collections at UConn. So,
yeah, and honestly, you may even have part of 6LF38 or 7 over there from Dave. I'm not sure.
we probably we have most of Dave Thompson's material.
Yeah. So, and I know some of it's at the museum because Ned did some stuff at both of those sites. Surface. But so it's a mix, and then everything around there, like I say, the whole area around the lake is a major site. Going off even to the west and the east into the wetlands on either side of the ridges.
Well, yeah.
Hey, Craig, I got to thank you for joining us tonight. I didn't know. I've been out there. I've dug with you. We've worked together side by side, and I don't think I knew enough about that area that you're talking about. So
yeah, basically the northwest corner. Most people don't.
Yeah.
And the reason is we don't have the infrastructure you have along the shore and going up along the center in the eastern part of the state. So we don't have the cultural research management teams coming out here.
We've used up an hour at this point. We're going to have you come back when you can tell us a little bit more and when you've reunited the collection and can look at it. Can you tell people that are listening how they could get in touch with you and the Institute possibly if they need more information?
Sure. They can call the Institute. It's the Institute for American Indian Studies in Washington, Connecticut. Their phone number is 860-868-0158. And you could talk to Paul. He's in charge of the research center. And he also takes information from me. They also have a web page and a Facebook page. And we do have a Facebook page for the Litchfield Hills Archaeology Club, so that we post stuff in there too.
And check out the escape room at the Institute if you're looking for something to do. Check it.
Yes,
it's
on
a
a
lot of
very
fun.
hot summer day, that's a nice, cool place to be. And if you hit it at the right time, there's wineberries right on the edge of the parking lot that
There you
are
go.
sweet as can be right now.
Thank you, Craig. Hey, if you're
Okay.
interested in contacting FOSA, you can see us on the web on Facebook, or you can contact fosa-ct.org.
And you can follow the Office of State Archaeology on Facebook or through our website at osa.uconn.edu.
Thank you for listening, everybody.